These are the things that push me away from modern eclecticism. First one here, the first one, if you're listening, is the subjectivity of the practice. The subjectivity of the practice, right? We all know what it means to be subjective. If something is objective, it means you can do that thing a million times and come out with the same result every time. That's an objective thing that's objectively true, that objectively happens. But when something is subjective, we refer to something that is on a person-by-person basis. So one person might find an argument persuasive and another person might not find that same argument persuasive. Why? Because it's subjective. It's based on the individual looking at it. And so when we come to modern eclecticism, there are a number of things that are very subjective when decisions are being made. So for example, you probably heard in some of the commentaries or in discussions surrounding textual variants with modern eclectics, they will say things like, well, the scribe might do this, or the scribe did that, or someone was thinking this, or this was happening during that time, and so thus. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. So if you go to Mark 9:29, again, I've talked at length about this ad nauseum, some of you might say, but Mark 9:29 is a perfect case here. So Mark 9:29, for those who don't know, we could even pull it up here. Let me pop this up. You should know it if you've been on the channel. I'm going to pop this over here. And if we go to Mark 9:29 in the trusty old New King James Version, we've got, so he said to them, this kind come out by nothing but by prayer and fasting, right? And fasting right there. It is contested through the modern eclectic method. And so typically it was seen as not authentic. Now, CBGM and Houghton's commentary have kind of put a little doubt on their previous thinking surrounding that and have at least give it a split line in the ECM. So now there's doubt. They're not entirely certain. But the reason why I wanted to point this reading out is because if you come back over to the passage and you read through Metzger's commentary, he says, in light of the increasing emphasis in the early church on the basis of fasting, it is understandable that keinistia, that means and fasting in Greek, is a gloss which found its way into most witnesses. Among the witnesses that resist such an accretion are important representatives of the Alexandrian, Western, and the Caesarean types of text. Now, I think it was the Western which was removed from this in the second edition of Metzger's commentary. Might have been the Caesarean text. I think it was probably Caesarean text. Can't remember exactly. But anyway, I want to point to the fact here that the argument for its exclusion, that Metzger is arguing for the exclusion here, is based on a very circumstantial, subjective reasoning that, well, the early church really liked fasting, right? I mean, and then there's oftentimes appended something like, well, there's no real reason why and fasting would have been added, or if it wasn't for there, or removed. But then you look through the text and you find that there actually is a reason why it might have accidentally been removed, and it has to do with homoteleuton, right, or parablepsis, when your eye skips past something because something looks the same. In the next verse, you have kappa alpha, and you've got kappa alpha of the K and keinistia, and you can easily skip that. But then there's also a textual variant in verse 30 where it's literally K ekithen. And so the entire word K could be a reason for, so it doesn't matter whether you have the variant in the next verse or not. There's a good reason for its accidental omission, which is makes sense to me. Now, Houghton, if anyone here is what do you call it, up on the latest and greatest in New Testament textual criticism, he has released a commentary just recently. I think it became publicly available just this month in November. I've ordered a copy. It's in the mail. It's not going to come until like sometime early December, which fine, whatever. Okay. But I did ask somebody to snip me a picture so I could see what Houghton's commentary says. And I'm not going to put it on here just because I don't have the copy yet and I don't want to get copyright strikes or anything like that. But Houghton, he does mention this idea of the church being really happy with the idea of fasting. So even in the newer commentaries, what we're getting is this kind of subjective, circumstantial stuff that that there's absolutely no way of proving it. So it comes down to the subjectiveness of, well, I think this is just a better reason, a better way. Even the weighting of manuscripts, for example, is subjective. Well, we just think that Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, that they're really, really good manuscripts, and so we're going to weigh them a little more than the rest of them. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but there's a lot of subjective things going on with the modern eclectic method. Now, I don't think that we can entirely do away with subjectivity when we talk about text criticism and things of that nature. However, modern eclectics, I think, have cornered the market when it comes to subjectively applying certain things to their decisions. All right, so the first thing that pushes me away from the modern eclectic method is this subjectivity. And so what I want to do is move on to what's called conjectural emendation. So what is a conjectural emendation? That is some fancy words. It just means a place where there's no support, and so you kind of guess at the reading. That's really what it is. This word or this phrase does not exist anywhere in any known manuscripts, but based on some other criteria, we think that it should be this, even though there's no support for it. So in the Nestle-Aland, there's actually two in the NA 28. I thought there were three, but there's two. 2 Peter 3:10. We've probably seen that one. There's another one in Acts 16:12. And then I got a third one here. It's not in the Nestle-Aland, but I have seen a couple people argue for this. And there's a number of others that have been kind of thrown up in the air as potentially maybe a conjectural emendation. But my point here, and the reason why this pushes me away from the critical methodologies, the modern eclectic methods, is because conjectural emendations, guessing at a text because we think that, there's some difficulty that makes this what it is, I don't think that should be necessary at all, especially when we talk about preservation. As a Christian, what does that say? Like if we look at any theology of preservation anyway, what does that say about the text of Scripture if something goes missing and we have to kind of guess at what's in there? Now, I understand that it's a little bit more than just simply a guess, maybe an educated guess, right? If we have to provide an educated guess at something that is somehow lost, what does that mean for preservation? I don't think that works. And of course, the issue is that the modern eclectic method allows for conjectural emendation. Now, I do have to be fair, right? Because there are a number, I've seen a discussion, I think this was on the ETC blog, Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, some time ago. And I think it was Peter Gurry was asking the question of who thinks that conjectural emendation should be part of textual criticism. And it was actually surprising to see that there were some which were like, yeah, we need to keep it on the table. And then there were a number of other people on there who were saying, no, we don't need conjectural emendation. So this is a point that seems to be a little bit of a debate back and forth, even amongst modern eclectics. But nonetheless, right, the modern eclectic methods have won out, and we have two conjectural emendations in the latest edition of the Nestle-Aland text, the latest critical edition in the ECM. So the first one is 2 Peter 3:10. Now, this gets a bit complicated because it's actually an emendation of a variant reading that's not a Byzantine reading. So if you're reading a Byzantine text, like this doesn't even matter to you. But let me make sure I pull this up right. This is in, I'm going to bring us over to the Bible. Let's do a screen share here. And then I'll give you the example here in 2 Peter 3:10. So, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. This is from the ESV. And then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. You got a note there. Some manuscripts say will be burned up. Then the conjectural emendation is that some works will not be exposed. Now, the ESV didn't go with the conjectural emendation. Again, like I said, conjectural emendation, it's what's the term? It's debated amongst those who are in the modern eclectic movement's the wrong word. Modern eclectic methods. Those who use the modern eclectic methods, it's debated. So the ESV opted not to go with the reading there. Now, the other one is in Acts 16:12. Again, I don't think this is necessarily going to change anything. This one here in 2 Peter does change the meaning of the text. But Acts 16:12, it does change the meaning, but the this one's difficult. And from there to Philippi, which is the foremost city of the part of Macedonia. Okay, this is the question here. So this is foremost city of the part of Macedonia, a colony, and we were staying in that city for some days. So the question is, right, what is this foremost city? Now the word here is protis, meaning first, right? Protis maridos tis Macedonias polis, the first city of the part of Macedonia. Now the reason why this seems to be problematic is because a number of people see this as referencing kind of like a capital city, if you will. But the city mentioned in here, I think it was Neapolis, was not the capital city. So the way that this was read and understood was that this whole idea of first city of the part of Macedonia was something that was actually wrong, that was just factually wrong. And there you have it in the scriptures. And so what happened is a number of text critics have come along and said, well, maybe it's actually not, maybe it's not foremost or first, but maybe it's not the first city, but maybe it's the first part. It's the first part of Macedonia instead of the first city of Macedonia, which would have worked better. Now, of course, we have this translated here as foremost or chief in the King James Version. So this whole idea that it was an important city, even though it wasn't necessarily the kind of capital. Interesting. What it is here is essentially the addition of an article and a modification of the word first. Is kind of put in there. So anyway, this is another example of a conjectural emendation. Again, doesn't make a huge deal of the text. I don't think so. I don't think anyone's going to be reading this, whether it's foremost city or foremost part of the city. Nobody's going to be reading that and thinking, oh man. But nonetheless, this goes to show that the methodology that modern eclecticism uses allows for this kind of conjectural emendation. I don't want anybody guessing at a text, whether it's an educated guess or not. Like if there's something in the text that's difficult, then that means we need to do some work around that difficulty rather than change it. Which brings me on to my third example of a textual or conjectural emendation. Now, again, to be fair, this example is not in our printed editions. And this is a conjectural emendation in the opposite direction. That is that a number of people think that this should be omitted entirely. Okay, so 1 Corinthians 14:34. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in the church. Now, of course, given our modern age and the age of feminism and all of that kind of stuff here, it's understandable why some wouldn't want this passage. And also, right, and I get it, when you read through this passage, you come to this and it seems to kind of like stick in there in kind of an awkward way. It's almost like a parenthetical statement. I'm not going to get into the depths of interpreting this passage. There are some interpretations. But where this is a conjectural emendation is that a number of people, and two notable people, one Philip Payne, I've had a chance to talk to him on the channel, and the late Dr. Gordon Fee, believe that this passage should be excised from the scripture, that this is not authentic. So their basis for saying so is a Latin manuscript which has a note in the text that says that this is not in such and such a version. So because we don't have any extant Greek manuscripts, and this is important to understand, right? A conjectural emendation Does not mean that it's not in a version somewhere. Okay. In the example of 2 Peter 3:10, I think there's a Syriac version that has the not in there. But a conjectural emendation says that if there's no Greek support at all, then it's a conjectural emendation. So coming back here to our example in 14:34 and 35, the omission of these two verses, the omission of these phrases, would be a conjectural emendation, because every one of our Greek manuscripts that contain the book of 1 Corinthians have these passages here. Now, again, did this make it into any of our printed editions? No, it didn't, right? It's the passages are in there. The omission is not. In fact, I don't even think the omission is noted in most of them. Nonetheless, again, right? It comes down to this thing about modern eclecticism allowing for this practice of conjectural emendation. Now, again, my opinion, right? I get it. My opinion is that there is tremendous evidence for the readings in our New Testaments that we don't need to invoke conjectural emendation to try to figure out a reading. We don't need to do that. And then, of course, on the theological side, on the discussion of preservation, what does that say about preservation if we have to educately guess at a reading, right? It just doesn't work. So this is one of those things that pushed me away from modern eclecticism. A third thing here that pushes me away from modern eclecticism is the ending of Mark, right? The ending of Mark. Not just the ending of Mark, but its implication. Right? So if you go back to the principles of New Testament textual criticism, one of them is that the shortest reading is to be preferred. The shortest reading is to be preferred. So you go to the long ending of Mark, and even though it's supported by every single Greek manuscript aside from 2, right, it gets cut out because of the short reading is to be preferred. Because the short reading is to be preferred. Can't speak. So that one's short and simple. I think this one just sort of speaks for itself. This is, and again, I know this is simplified. I understand that there's other parts that get pulled into a discussion, into a textual variant. But the fact that the shortest reading is applied subjectively, right? Going back to the first point, often applied subjectively, in a case where the most typical kind of variant is going to be one of omission, scribal skip, homeoteliaton, homeoarcton, all of these things, parablepsis, right? These kinds of errors are going to happen, and it takes a lot less effort to remove text by accident than the creative effort it takes to put something in there. So the shortest reading is to be preferred. And it's kind of like for me. All right. And then lastly here, actually, this isn't lastly, I've got 2 more. See, I've got a lot of beefs against the modern critical method. So the fourth one here is the so-called frankentext problem. Now, I want to come at this at a slightly different angle. So I've been doing some work lately on the preface to the Byzantine text. We're modifying the preface for, updated stuff, and then we're going to put that into the 2026 edition. But in that, Dr. Robinson writes about this frankentext problem. Now, he doesn't like the term frankentext. He doesn't like that phrase. He doesn't like the way that, right? Because he thinks that, the implication is that you take a dead thing and you patch it with another dead thing. But his reasoning is that Scripture is alive, and he's absolutely right. Scripture is alive. Frankentext. Maybe poor, but it's just people understand that. People understand what we mean by frankentext. So let me read the portion in the preface which speaks about this. This is in the preface to the Byzantine text. So Dr. Robinson says, modern eclectic praxis operates on a variant unit basis without any apparent consideration of the consequences. The resultant situation is simple. The best modern eclectic texts simply have no proven existence within transmissional history. That's his point. That's the point that he's making there. No proven existence within transmissional history. And their claim to represent the autograph, or the closest approximation thereunto, cannot be substantiated from the extant manuscripts, versional or patristic data. I don't know, Calvin L. Oh, Calvin L. Calvin L. Porter has noted pointedly that modern eclecticism, although not based upon a theory of the history of the text, right? And this is seen as problematic, right? I'm interrupting here. The fact that there's no history of the text, this is seen as problematic, and I think rightly so. Does reflect a certain presupposition about that history. It seems to assume that very early the original text was rent piecemeal and so carried to the ends of the earth, where the textual critic, like lamenting Isis, must seek it by his skill. Such a scenario imposes an impossible burden upon textual restoration, since not only is the original text no longer extant in any known manuscript or text type, but no manuscript or group of manuscripts reflects such in an overall pattern of readings. There thus remains no transmissional guide to suggest how such an original text would appear when found. So basically what he's saying here, this is a very long-winded way of saying essentially that when you take the text variant by variant without considering the wider New Testament text history, you end up with a text that has no basis in the transmission history of the New Testament. I hope that it gets a little bit hard to explain, but I hope you understand that. When you take everything piece by piece without looking at the overall wider picture, you end up with a quilted patchwork. Now, this is interesting. Now, notice in this phrase, or in this little paragraph, he says, where is it? That such a scenario is impossible burden upon a textual restoration, since not only is the original text no longer extant in any known manuscript or text, but no manuscript or group of manuscript reflects such in the overall readings. Now, I have to do something which I don't want to do. I don't want to do this. I'm sorry, Dr. Peter Gurry. I'm sorry, Dr. Elijah Hickson. But I do have to bring up Dr. Wallace's quote from Myth and Mistakes. Now, I'll put it in context. Okay? I did come across the article in the ETC blog about the complaint about removing the context from this. So I'll put the context in. So Dr. Wallace, in his Myth and Mistakes, this kind of goes without saying. This seems to be the sort of natural progression to this idea of trying to put things together piecemeal. Right? Wallace in the introduction to Myth and Mistakes says these two attitudes, radical skepticism and absolute certainty, must be avoided when we examine the New Testament text. Okay, so I'm just quoting that to get the context in there. Then he says, we do not have now in our critical Greek text or any translations exactly what the authors of the New Testament wrote. Even if we did, we would not know it. Okay? And this is exactly what Dr. Robinson is pointing out in the preface. See, what happens is when you take a text critical position, which ignores the groupings and the types and all of these things and just simply pick it out variant by variant by variant by variant, you end up with a text that cannot be validated. And I think that it's understood here, at least in a small part, that Dr. Wallace knows that even if we had it in front of us, we would not know it. Again, I'll point out, right, he continues to say there are many, many places in which the text of the New Testament is uncertain. So I'll continue to point out here that Wallace's reason for mentioning this is to say, hey, yeah, we are aware of this issue, but we're not going to come to this with radical skepticism or absolute certainty. So got to keep that in mind. And I think he's absolutely right here. But I think that we can be a little bit more certain with our New Testament text than what modern eclecticism gives us. And of course, I would say we find that in the Byzantine text, but we'll get there. All right. And lastly here, before we get to the comments here, my fifth reason for being pushed away from the modern critical methodology is what I would call compounding error effect in CBGM. Well, what do I mean by compounding error effect? First, you got to understand what CBGM is. That's not an easy task. So my understanding, and I'll give you a high level of understand a high level view of what CBGM is. If you want super detailed, you can go back to my channel. I was talking to Joey McCallum about it. I should probably read a little bit more into CBGM, but the way that I understand that this works is that it's a database-driven system that uses an algorithm on stored results. Bunch of fancy words. If you're a computer nerd, you know exactly what that means. If you're not a computer nerd, I'll explain that. We have a database. And so whenever a textual critic makes a decision based on comparing a number of manuscripts, they weigh a few things. They still do the critical task of working. CBGM doesn't take away the human element, right? You still got human biases. You still got human frailty in there, all of that stuff. But what they do is their decision gets put into a database, and that decision is stored so that when they go to make a decision on another manuscript somewhere else, they can pull that decision up and make a decision on coherence, hence the name coherence based genealogical method. So what happens is all of this information gets stored and stored and stored and stored and stored and stored. And when a mistake is made, especially if it's made earlier on in the process, all the decisions that happen later on are going to be based off of faulty data. And the problem here, right, and this is why I said it's compounding errors. One error gets compounded over and over and over and over and over. And it doesn't take much before a system like that is overtaken by errors. Now, this is just generally speaking. I would love to see how the algorithm itself works, but that is currently a black box. And I know people might not like that description that it's a black box, but it really is. Because we don't know what the algorithm is doing and how the algorithm is making its comparisons. But either way, CBGM appears to have this sort of compounding error effect in it. I'd like to validate that further by taking a look at what the algorithm itself is doing. So one little mistake turns into a bigger mistake later on down the road. It's kind of like slinging a rocket at the moon, right? If you get your measurement off just by like half a degree at the start of the rocket journey, you will miss the moon by like 500,000 miles by the time you get there. So that I say that's it, but that's actually a lot. So that's what pushes me away from the modern eclectic method.